This week on Quality Digest Live, we discover why creativity is no accident.
Plus, when walking the Gemba means walking the beat. That and more when we come back.
This episode of Quality Digest Live is brought to you by Mitutoyo America. Whatever your metrology challenges, Mitutoyo supports you from start to finish.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for February 26th, 2016. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest.
That he is, and I'm Quality Digest publisher Mike Richmond. We begin the show this week with a new book release from the American Quality Institute, and the author is a name familiar to many of us and you out there who read us frequently, Bill Levinson. Levinson, of course, is a longtime Quality Digest contributor. His latest book, The Risk-Based Thinking Handbook, is available from the AQI now, and you can see a picture of the cover right there. So as the title would indicate, this book offers users of ISO 9001 a look at one of the most important and far-reaching additions to the 2015 version of the standard, namely the inclusion of risk and risk-based thinking as a management consideration. The intention of the Risk-Based Thinking Handbook is to help readers not just understand risk from the perspective of passing an ISO 9001 audit, but in terms of improving the organization and taking better advantage of opportunities as well. The chapters cover things like internal and external risk, failure mode and effects analysis, error proofing, supply chains, and a lot more. Now, based on the attendance, and Dirk, we've seen this, you've seen this yourself many times, the attendance of our webinars on this topic and clicks on our articles we run about risk, those of you in the QD audience are very much interested in this concept and how it fits into ISO 9001. So to get some further perspective here, you might want to check out the book and get Bill Levinson's take as well. And yes, Dirk, I know what you're thinking. He does mention Henry Ford within that, of course. Bill is a big Henry Ford fan,
his man.
if you're not familiar. And he always mentions Henry Ford in one way or another. He talks about Henry Ford, and Henry Ford's, he didn't really call it risk in so many words, but his perspective on how to manage change and manage opportunities that arose from change within an organization was very important to his functioning as well.
Yep. So there you go. So if you're interested in risk, if risk management is important to your company, you're going to want to check out Bill Levinson's new book.
New book, that's right. Check it out.
Okay, well, you know, one of the main causes of infertility is what they call low sperm motility. And this means that your sperm are healthy, but, well, basically they can't swim. So German researchers from the Institute for Integrative Nanosciences at IFW Dresden have developed little outboard engines, as it were, that attach to the sperm and motor them to their destination.
Wow.
These micromotors, they're about 20 microns long, so they're, well, you know, a hair is considered to be 50 to 60 microns, so these things are about a third the thickness of a hair, and they can deliver poorly swimming sperms to the oocyte for fertilization. These so-called sperm bots, we prefer to call them as RoboSperm.
Yeah.
These were printed, it's pretty amazing actually. They're printed using a Nanoscribe Photonic Professional GT system. Nanoscribe is the company. And these are basically 3D printed little tiny micromotors. And they consist of tiny plastic helices that are then coated with a metallic coating, and they're controlled then by a rotating magnetic field. So the groundbreaking results have recently been published in ACS journal Nanoletters. The 3D printer allowed researchers to print these very tiny objects, like I said, about 20 microns, 20-25 microns, with really high precision. They're printed on a photopolymer, with a laser printed on a photopolymer, and then, as I said, coated with a metal layer so they can have some magnetic properties. Thus, they can be controlled and moved to the oocyte by the magnetic field. Now, we have a little video clip here that we can show you. I happen to think this is just cooler than heck. So that's an animation. We have an actual real video here coming up. So there you go. That's an actual video of an actual RoboSperm attaching to the tail of a sperm and driving it into the oocyte. Actually, hey Chris, can you play that again by any chance? Oh, there we go. There we go. So you see it kind of works its way on. It's being spun by a magnetic field. It's spun by a magnetic field, and you can see from there it gets driven over to the oocyte. I mean, this to me is just like amazing
It
stuff.
is really
It's
cool.
kind of, making up for the shortcomings of mankind.
So to speak.
So to speak.
Thank you. Well, so that replaces the flagellum, if I understand my
Right, exactly. So yeah, the flagellum is normally moving and
in that direction, that kind of way,
and moving it. And so what they're doing, and I think it's somewhat random, but as they're moving these helices, they probably, I'm assuming, randomly attach to a sperm, and then of course they continue driving, and they drive it in the direction it needs to go. So,
and these are 3D printed.
These are 3D printed 20 micron helixes. So they're 20 microns in length, which means the actual thickness of the helix, I'm guessing, is, a couple microns or something.
That's crazy.
It's pretty crazy.
And again, the extruded material is a metallic.
It's not extruded, it's laser printed.
Oh, it's laser printed.
It's laser printed onto a plastic, a photopolymer. Yeah. It's laser printed onto a plastic, and then it's coated with a metallic substance to make it magnetic, so that it can be controlled by a magnet.
That's just incredible.
I know, that's just
incredible to me. Wow, crazy stuff. This world we're in today, it's changing so fast. 5 years ago, you couldn't even imagine that could be done.
Robosperm,
wow, unbelievable. All right, well, thanks, Dirk. Okay, well, Creativity is Not an Accident by Scott Birkin is the name of an article that appeared in yesterday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. Scott Birkin, one of our newer authors, Dirk, and you can see the piece right there. Creativity is not an accident. Curiosity is far simpler and more useful than serendipity. Well, according to Birkin in this piece, the myth that accidents play the major role in major discoveries is mostly, as he says, just that. It's a myth. This idea, we've all heard of it many times before, the eureka moment where something happens, an apple falls on somebody's head, or you see something happen, water rising in a bathtub, and you say, hey, that's the answer right there. Well, it's a myth. It's mostly a myth. I mean, certainly we know that there's some truth to this, and of course the history of invention is filled with these kind of stories of lucky mistakes that send a discoverer onto the path of some great breakthrough that he or she has been looking for in some cases decades, many years or even decades. But what's often not acknowledged in these kind of incidences with these inventors is that they were able to make that leap from one thing to another. Yes, because maybe there was a lucky accident, there was something that came to mind that they saw in a different way, but what happened really was that they were prepared for that accident because they worked very hard on the project and they had an open mind to alternative ways of seeing it. So, in other words, they weren't locked into any one thing, if you think about it from that perspective. They weren't looking at this and saying, well, we've got to solve this problem in this type of a way. They had a problem, they were thinking about it, they were playing with it, they were considering it, something happened, and then they seized on it, right? And they were able to see the connection that made the one thing tie into the other. There's a quote I want to read for you, which is a quote that I've liked a lot in my life, I've referred to many times. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And I actually did a little research. That quote actually is from the great Roman man of letters, Seneca the Younger, about 2,000 years ago. I actually always thought that quote was from Vince Lombardi, because I've always heard it attributed to Vince Lombardi, but apparently Seneca the Younger, just a few years
earlier, yeah. Okay.
But apparently Seneca the Younger, back in Rome 2,000 years ago, was the first one to make that connection. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. So luck, in other words, seems like it's kismet, it just happens, a lightning strike, but really what it means is that you're ready. You've prepared your mind and yourself to deal with something that's going to happen. The opportunity presents itself and you're able to recognize it for what it is. And that's really what's going on here. So to achieve a breakthrough, I think one really has to work constantly at the problem you're trying to solve, and you need to kind of use play. I referred to play, and Birkin refers to play in this article too. So you need to use your play time as a big part of that too. Many times what happens is, and we all know this, I mean, when you're working on a problem, is you tend to cycle on it and cycle on it and cycle on it because you're trying to find that particular way to solve it. But when you play, when you let your mind relax and you kind of it's almost like looking at one of those pictures, Dirk, one of those pictures where you have to let your eyes
right.
kind of diffuse a little bit to really see what's going on. It's the same thing when you play with the problem and you begin to think about it in a different way. Many times that solution will come to you. And it's in this playing with serious intent towards solving a difficult problem that you can really free the mind to make those really valuable connections. See, it's all about connection. Really, this article is about the idea that you want to connect some disparate elements of a thing and see how they work together to solve whatever problem it is. And really, I think for anyone, anywhere, trying to solve a problem. The moral of the story really is that you need to work on it, and you need to work on it, and you need to work on it some more. And you got to keep your mind open, and you understand that relational possibilities in play are with focus intent. Not just play, I mean, it's play with focus intent. When you do that, something unexpected can happen, and it can lead to the breakthrough that you've been looking for. You'll realize that luck had everything and nothing to do with it at the same time, right? And when you do it that way, you see that, well, it was lucky that happened, but it was lucky because I was ready for that luck to happen, and I was prepared, and that's why it happened.
So, I mean, does he give examples of how to be open to this? I mean, because I can see, I mean, I think it makes sense, but also it's almost like it takes almost training to be open to those surprises, those bits of luck that are going to come your way. I mean, and how do you break through the mentality that we normally have of a structured approach to doing things, to be just, well, I'm just going to be lay here with my mind open and examine my belly button, and maybe something will hit me over the head, right?
Well, he uses 5 examples actually. He used the example of, and I can't remember them all right now, but definitely the microwave, with the story we've heard many times with the scientist walking by the candy bar and it melted in his pocket. and he realized
radar, I think.
Radar. So he understood that microwaves existed. He talks about X-rays as well, which was an accident. Saccharin, the development of saccharin was an accident where there was this guy working in a lab, and he went to have dinner after working in the lab, and he noticed on his fingers was a sticky, sweet flavor. He's like, wow, what is that? And he went back and tasted every flask that he was working on that day, and most of them tasted really bad, but he found the one that tasted good.
One of them almost killed him.
One of them almost killed him. So he talks about how those things happen, and they all were these moments where there were scientists working on something, and they were working on something that was different from what they found, but they were open to it. They were kind of willing to see the connections, and they solved the problem through that. And sometimes it was a different problem, the problem they were exactly working on. But that's
well, okay, it's funny. I mean, you were talking about Ford in Levinson earlier. But I think Ford did a lot of that. I mean, we talk about, and maybe this isn't quite the same thing, but we've all heard the story about how radiator caps. The radiator caps in early Fords were actually scrap material that came from some other part of the process, which was punching out holes.
Right.
Well, Ford,
what are we going to do with that?
What are we going to do? Other people would probably think of throwing it out, but hey, here's this bright idea. Wait a minute, we've already got the blanks now to use to make radiator caps, and it was part of a waste stream. And Ford did a lot of that, and maybe it's kind of those same ideas as this. Don't look at everything as a waste. Look at it as a byproduct of something. Because the saccharin thing was maybe the same thing, right? It's like these might have been experiments that would have been thrown out otherwise.
Right. Well, I mean, again, it's you work on the problem, but you also are open to not working on the problem.
Surprises that come along.
Yeah, letting it kind of percolate in the background too, and that's the way you're going to find a way to do something better. And radiator cap is another good example. I mean, there's millions of these things.
Right.
Throughout the course of time, and I think that's how science is supposed to work. You talk about Newton with the apple, right? I mean, this idea, which is
apocryphal,
kind of a myth. But Newton said, if I've seen further than others, it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. This idea that it all develops based on work that's already gone before. And that's the scientific process. And mistakes, accidents, luck, whatever you want to call it, is part of that process too.
Yeah.
But knowing what it means and being able to apply it to the problem you're working on.
Good stuff.
Pretty good lesson by Scott Birkin there.
All right. Well, changing gears here just a little bit. In October of 2014, 17-year-old Laquan McDonald was shot 16 times by a Chicago police officer. In November 2015, footage of the shooting was finally released, leading eventually to protests by both the black and the white community, and to Officer Jason Van Dyke being charged with murder, and the forced resignation of Police Superintendent Gary McCarthy. And responding in part to the demand for greater police transparency and accountability, Chicago's police department announced the expansion of the use of body cameras on police officers. Now, in his article, Gemba Walks or Video Surveillance, Mike Micklewright points out, as others have, that while the use of body cameras does help monitor potentially bad actions by police or bad actions by criminals, false accusations and so forth, it does not really address the root of the problem. Think of body cameras as, let's say, a form of going to the Gemba, going to the workplace. It is one thing to observe what is going on. It is another thing altogether to address what is going on. So going to the Gemba, either electronically or in person, it's only a tool. It is not really a solution. It's a means of gathering information so that hopefully you use this information to come to a solution. In fact, Micklewright quotes Craig Futterman, a law professor and director of the University of Chicago's Police Accountability Project, who said that body cameras are a good tool, but far from a solution to the problem. Futterman said, quotes, "Body cameras don't address the underlying reasons why this occurred. People look for that magical elixir for police violence, and this isn't that," end quotes. Now, we don't want to minimize what happened in Chicago by kind of facetiously comparing it to what happens on shop floors across America. But there are lessons that we can learn from any event, no matter how tragic, and events that we can apply to ourselves and our work lives. In this case, Micklewright asks several questions when comparing body cameras and police interaction with the community and the community they serve, and how that might provide lessons to how we deal with our own Gemba. So he's making the reference between, let's say, the police Gemba, which is the public and serving in public and being out in public, and let's say a manufacturing Gemba, your manufacturing floor. And he asked several questions. I just kind of want to delve into them here just for a few minutes. One of the first questions he asked is, do your employees view the Gemba walk as a tool you use to inspect them? And question number two, these are related, do they dislike Gemba walks and are they nervous when they occur? And I think both of these questions addressed the trust issue. Is your purpose in watching the floor to find fault with people, or is it to find fault with the process? And I think, unfortunately, if the culture of the company is still to be in an inspection mode and to try to inspect quality into the process, in a sense, even under the guise of going to the Gemba. It's not to examine the process, it's to find somebody doing wrong in the process so that then you can beat up on them. Well, that's not really the purpose of going to the Gemba, and that shouldn't be the purpose of body cameras. They do serve a purpose. I mean, hopefully you're going to spot some malfeasance on either side of the camera. But it doesn't get to what is the culture. Yeah. Is the culture to help? Is the culture to serve? Is the culture to improve the process? Or is the culture to try to inspect goodness into the process, where that process is a policing process or a manufacturing process? Yeah. And it's all comes down to how do you build trust? Yeah.
Is it a one-off? I mean, in other words, are you looking at one officer and one incident? Or are you looking at it as a reflection of, like you say, a broader culture, a system? Is there a systemic problem? Again, as you say, on either side. Right. Is there a systemic problem with the way that police, say, interact in these situations? And any one data point is only one data point, as tragic as it may be, but it still is not necessarily, although it can be, not necessarily a blame of any one particular incident or officer. It's indicative. These body cams are indicative of trying to learn what's going on in the broader culture.
And you would hope, I mean, and this what I'm about to say applies equally to, say, policing as it does to manufacturing, sort of. You would hope that the only result of, let's say, body cameras isn't just to spot a police officer doing something wrong and then fire the guy or whatever, without going, okay, so is this a trend? Is this a common problem? Do we have hiring problems? Do we got training problems? Do we, what's going on that this is happening?
Special cause or common cause?
Exactly. You hope it's not just, well, let's just beat up on any cop that we see doing something wrong and fire the guy or discipline him. Obviously that should happen, but that can't be the only result. And the same thing on a manufacturing floor. I mean, you might go to the Gemba, you might see something going wrong. Obviously you want to fix it immediately, you want to remediate the situation, take care of things, but also what you should be doing is going back and saying, okay, now how do we, as employees, as the people on the floor, how do we resolve this process problem that we have just seen? How do we as a culture, how do we as a company deal with this obviously process mistake? And what's your input? And I know a lot of community policing is based on that, is going to the community and hopefully getting their input on how better to interact with the neighborhood and so forth. So basically, the upshot: everyone who is part of a process should have a feel of what they say, and that helps to build trust. Micklewright also asks, have you stated and properly communicated the purpose of Gemba walks to all employees? And all our employees learning, are you doing the walks, the Gemba walks correctly? So again, this comes down to, this does not only build trust, but it also is, I think one of the big problems in quality control, and I've seen it a lot from people who grouse about their quality control person, is it's been inadequately communicated, what that person is trying to do.
Yeah.
Is hopefully that person isn't there to be a policeman, so to speak, and spot somebody doing something wrong. The quality person and the purpose of Gemba walks or any quality initiative should be to look at the process, and that should be communicated. And it should be communicated, look, I'm not out here to look over your shoulder. I am here as a manager, as a QA guy. I'm out here to understand the process and then to get feedback from you on how we can make this better. And that's why I'm out here. And I think that's probably most of the time that isn't communicated. Just,
very well.
oh, here comes the boss out here again to look over our shoulders. And he may have the most honorable of intentions. He or she may have the most honorable of intentions, but doesn't communicate it, and so that trust doesn't get built.
Yeah, and the stakes are high. I mean, the stakes are high on the shop floor. They're higher
obviously.
out the beat because I mean, these cops are dealing with life and death situations, and they're dealing with their careers. As, potentially, maybe somebody on the shop floor is dealing with their career too if they feel like they're making a mistake that they can't correct and that maybe the Gemba walk will uncover.
Or they hide it.
And that's even worse.
And that's
really.
even worse.
Yeah,
and that's the other problem with. That's the other problem with any kind of control system or cultural system where all you're doing is beating up on the person who does something wrong. Well, then you kind of get this
a negative feedback loop where it's like it's going to get worse and worse because it's never going to get exposed.
Nobody's going to say anything, or they're not going to rat on each other. He talks about that in the police department. Even police officers who saw what went down lied about it.
Yeah.
And it's just, everybody wants to cover their back and everybody's kind of in it together. Well, we'll support you. That happens in manufacturing as well.
Sure,
it's like, oh no, everybody's going to cover for each other because it's the man. We got to protect ourselves from the man. It's because the man hasn't done a very good job of communicating what he's doing.
Yeah, that it's not the man and it's not us. It's us. It's all of us.
It's all of us, exactly. Yeah, so good stuff by Micklewright. I encourage you to read the article. It's an interesting comparison.
Interesting perspective, by Mike Micklewright always gives us good stuff. All right, thanks Dirk, thanks Mike. All right, occasionally in Quality Digest Daily or on the show, we'll cover a story that describes the disconnect between the ways statisticians think and the way the rest of us do. Usually these pieces leave you with a, wow, who knew there was a difference?
There, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, you stepped on the joke that I had.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
I was going to say, forget it now. I was going to say, who knew there was a difference between average and median like me?
Sorry.
Oh, well. Anyway, for those of us that aren't statisticians, pieces like this lightheartedly point out why we shouldn't jump to any conclusions when looking at data, simply because as non-experts, we may not really understand what we're looking at. Even worse, when presented with dubious data, we may not sniff out the logical fallacies underpinning them. That's the point of, unfortunately, a far from lighthearted article that we ran in yesterday's issue of Quality Digest Daily titled Imprisoned by Statistics, and it was written by Eston Moritz of Minitab. Well, the piece, as you see right there, tells the sad tale of a nurse by the name of Lucia de Burke, and she was a pediatric nurse in the Netherlands, who was accused and convicted of the murder of 4 patients and the attempted murder of 3 others. She was supposedly responsible for patient care and medication at the time of all these incidences. Now, I say supposedly because it later came out that she was not present during some of these incidences. Well, it turns out that there was no actual evidence connecting her to any crime. In fact, the prosecution's case rested almost entirely on a calculation from an expert witness that there was a, quote, 1 in 342 million chance, unquote, that any single nurse's shifts, like those of de Burke's, would randomly coincide with so many deadly occurrences. By the way, that expert witness, his name was Henk Elfers, was a psychologist with little, if any, statistical training. Interesting. Be that as it may, the 1 in 342 million chance argument carried weight in that courtroom, and if you think about it, really that makes sense, right? I mean,
it sounds so sciencey.
1 in 342 million, right? I mean, gosh, that can't be a coincidence. It can't be random, right? I mean, and if you think about it, the attorneys, the judge, The jury, none of those people had any statistical information. They didn't have the chops, really, to question that calculation and ask if the data supporting it were trustworthy or not, right? I mean, they don't know any better, right? I mean, so how can they know if it's trustworthy or not?
Right.
Well, they didn't. Well, as it turns out, those data were not trustworthy, and Mart says they were littered actually with inaccuracies, cherry picking, and fallacious assumptions. In looking at the data more stringently, it's possible that the random chances of a nurse's shift randomly coinciding with a number of deadly incidences of this nature could in fact have been as low as 1 in 25. So that it just happened that way could have been a 1 in 25 chance. It's certainly a lot different from 1 in 342 million.
Right.
Eventually, after 7 years in jail, and due in no small part to pressure from professional statisticians reviewing the case, Lucia de Burke's conviction was reviewed and eventually overturned. The Dutch government compensated de Burke for this miscarriage of justice, but the scar from this really still remains, and it remains in their criminal justice system, and it remains to a certain extent also in this idea that general population statistics are a weakness for many people out there walking around, people understanding how statistics really work. I mean,
well, it also damages the idea of statistics as
being reliable.
When done properly.
I mean,
exactly.
and read the article, because I mean, S.M. Martz gets into this a little bit about exactly why that calculation, that 1 in 342 million, was wrong. I mean, right away it was wrong because he tripled a P count. I forget what the term was.
Yeah.
But he that basically, it was mischaracterized.
Yeah.
It was mischaracterized, and then the data was cherry picked, and it was very much messed up. So it really was not a statistically valid argument. Well, the point, in fact, here is that statistics are widely used in society, yet the subtleties of what those data actually mean are highly likely to be mischaracterized. We see it in the political realm all the time. That's misused, mischaracterized a lot.
Really?
Oh yeah. On the factory floor, now that of course costs time, it costs money. In a medical facility, not to mention a court of law, the repercussions of statistical misinterpretation, whether it's intentional or not, can mean really life and death, or it can take years away from someone's life, as Lucia de Burke could tell you. And this is a real problem. I mean, you know, those of us who somewhat use statistics in our life, we figure we know what we're doing. You know, I mean, sure, we make a number comparison, but we don't really know. I mean, I made light of this average versus median thing. Well, the difference between average and median is pretty significant. And if you conflate those two things, you can really misconstrue a set of data, and you can use that, and again, sometimes it's done willfully. You can intentionally mischaracterize data, and voters or people that are looking at a process and trying to figure out how to make a decision on it, people that aren't professional statisticians, jury, judge, can be led astray by these statistics being mischaracterized. It's a big problem.
Yeah, you mentioned this. It's a political year. So we're hearing numbers thrown, left and right, and basically, most people, I think, at this point just ignore them, which is unfortunate because, as I said earlier, I mean, one of the things when statistics are misused, which in a political year are usually misused deliberately, is it just makes people not trust, statistically, we know that, and they'll give some sort of, medical advice or, climate change or whatever it is, and people just immediately like zone out, well, that's statistics, and everybody knows, lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? Right. So, and stuff like that just kind of drives home that whole distrust of it. So
yeah, it's a problem, major problem. But S.M. Martz is getting on it, giving us some insight as to how it can be maybe made a little bit better by people having a little more statistical knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. As I'm sure all of you out there do.
That's right.
Okay, so now it's time for our tweet of the week, and this one isn't some funny quip. It's more of a make you think kind of tweet, and it comes to us from Mark Crowley, who asks, from a leadership point of view, who is your all-time favorite fictional character?
Well, we talked about this before the show.
I had to think about it. I had to think. What was yours?
I said, the first thing that came to my mind was Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor, come on. He had Otis, he had this Tessmacher, he had to think of all these plots, and he had to execute them through his team. I mean,
so obviously I had to take Xavier, the height of the X-Men, right? Leader of the X-Men.
Yeah, those
guys are great leaders.
Shakespeare had a lot of them too. Yeah, that's a good one right there.
That's something that you guys can think about. Your favorite fictional character who was a great leader.
Tell you what, write us at qdl@qualitydigest.com and let us know what you think.
I really had to scratch. I mean, all the books I read, they're all anti-heroes, and none of them.
They're all loners.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the kind of reading Dirk does. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Well, that's our show for this week. But before we go, we'd like to thank this week's sponsor. Mitutoyo Corporation is the world's largest provider of measurement and inspection solutions, offering the most complete selection of machines, sensors, systems, and services, with a line encompassing CMMs, vision, form, and finishing measuring machines, as well as precision tools and instruments and metrology data management software. Mitutoyo's national network of metrology centers and support operations provides application, calibration, service repair, and educational programs to ensure that their more than 6,000 metrology products will deliver measurement solutions for their customers. For more information, visit mitutoyo.com or click on the banner ad just below or just to the right of this video player page.
That's right. Okay, well, that wraps up today's show, and thanks to all of you for joining us. And be sure to write in and tell us who your favorite fictional
I want to see him.
leader is. I want to see him.
QDL@qualitydigest.com. Write in and let us know. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us again. You guys all have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.
So long.
Bye.